Hello and welcome to our 7-8 minutes of weekly Torah talk on this Erev Pesach, the eve of Passover. Our guest today is Rabbi Joel Levy of the Conservative Yeshiva in Jerusalem. Hello, Shabbat Shalom and Chag Sameach, Rabbi. Thank you for being with us.
It's a pleasure. Shabbat Shalom, Chag Sameach.
So this evening we'll be reading the Haggadah and we'll be reminded of the story of the people of Israel as they leave Egypt. It's a story that we read on the regular reading of Torah portions when we get to the book of Shmot. But this week we think about it again as part of our celebration of Pesach. A lot of the celebration is really about food. So are we supposed to enter Pesach in a state of hunger, thirst? How are we supposed to conduct our business before the Seder and after?
So I think everyone knows that we go on a journey during the Pesach Seder. We go on a journey which traces the journey of the Israelites from Genai to Shevach, from oppression to freedom, and we also go on a journey, a culinary journey, a journey from hunger at the beginning of the Seder to satiation at the end of the Seder, and that journey, I guess, parallels the journey that we go on intellectually as we follow the Israelites from oppression to freedom. So there is a tradition, a long-standing tradition, which is mentioned in the Mishnah, of entering the Seder, entering the Pesach hungry. That you should enter the Seder with a great deal of hunger, to the extent that the first food that you eat at the Seder, the matzah, which is a mitzvah d'oraita, a Torah obligation to eat matzah on Pesach. That matzah is supposed to be eaten b'te'avon, with relish, with desire, and so we take this very, very simple food, which is perhaps the simplest food that we can imagine, flour and water, which has been mixed together and cooked extremely quickly. And we don't just eat it, but we eat it with appetite. So we're supposed to enter the Seder hungry enough that the simplest food that we can imagine is eaten with a great deal of appetite and desire. And that's pretty hungry.
Yeah, and we also have to be thirsty enough to drink 4 cups of wine during the Seder.
That's certainly true, and the cups of wine also follow that journey. There's a discussion in the Talmud about the different meaning of the cups of wine, and in particular whether we have to recline during the consumption of those cups of wine. And they ask the question about whether during the consumption of those 4 cups, whether we have to recline for the first 2 or for the second 2. Asking the question based on the idea that the journey of the Seder is the journey from oppression to freedom, and therefore maybe we shouldn't be reclining at the start of the Seder because we're still in the period of oppression, as it were. We're still living out the experience of oppression. The end of the Seder, maybe it's more obvious that we should be reclining for the cups of wine, because by the end of the Seder, we're already experiencing the same freedom the Israelites experienced when they were already out of Egypt.
Right, and some of us might be half drunk as well.
Say again, sorry?
And some of us might be half drunk at that point as well.
We might be half drunk. 4 cups of wine is a significant amount of alcohol to consume. There are minimum quantities for the amount of wine that you're supposed to drink, and it's not like Purim, where there's a kind of open license to really drink to excess, but maybe even at Pesach we drink a similar amount of wine, but in a more structured way, a kind of very, very rigorously structured way. So by the end of the Seder, we're certainly very happy, and the earliest sources that we have around the 4 cups of wine, make it clear that that 4 cups was really a minimum quantity that was considered to be an amount that would make you sameach, that would make you happy. And the wine certainly contributes to that sense of simcha that we're supposed to be experiencing at Pesach.
Right. Tell me something. There is a certain irony to the fact that we are moving from hunger to having so much food, when the people of Israel, if we think about the Torah portions ahead of us, when they move through the desert, they tend to remember with some fondness the great food of Egypt and truly complain about the hunger they experience in the desert. They are moving from a land of plenty to into the desert.
That's a lovely question. But the notion of satiation, one part of the Seder, we can see ourselves as traveling on the same journey that they're traveling on. Meaning that we're going on the journey, we're kind of imagining ourselves going on the journey from freedom to oppression. But the whole time we're telling that story, we're sitting comfortably surrounded by family and friends and food, and we know perfectly well that we're not slaves, we're not oppressed. There's a sense of plenty around the entire experience. Let's put it a different way. The very act of telling the story is an act of free people imagining the journey that you go on from hunger to satiation. So you're right. There is something ironical about around that journey. There's also something very dangerous about that journey. If you look in the book of Deuteronomy, it repeatedly cautions us and says that when you enter land,
right.
That satiation is almost a dirty word in the book of Deuteronomy. To be full is associated with moral hazard. The time when you're going to forget God and you're going to forget the journey is the point at which you have food in your belly, and your consciousness of having been helped by God and your consciousness of other people's suffering is going to be at its lowest point when you have food and you're full. So it's there's something painful and dangerous about the idea that at the end of the Seder we hit this place of having eaten well and been satisfied, and not only that, but the tradition also says that we are obliged to eat certain sections of the meal a la softa when we're full.
Right.
So the Tosefta, for example, says that in the times of the Paschal offering, the Pesach Paschal offering itself, which was the final thing that was consumed at the meal, was eaten a la sova when you're already sated. That we have the experience of eating as full people. That tradition is kind of passed over into our tradition of the afikum, which is the last piece of matzah that we consume at the table, which some people think is also a doraita obligation, an obligation from the Torah, and that's also eaten when we're completely sated and full. The experience of eating the first piece of matzah, but te'avon, when we're starving and hungry and pretending to be like slaves, is then set against the experience of eating the very last piece of matzah of the Seder, which is eaten a la sova when we're already sated and full. Those are two very different types of consumption, and they reflect freedom that we experience now. Maybe not the experience, as you asked, maybe not the experience of actually being in the desert, but the experience of being, sated, well-fed, comfortable people living in the century that we've in and reliving a story, as opposed to people who are actually going through that journey, where I'm sure even after they left Egypt, there was not plenty of meat. And as you say, the children of Israel fantasized about going back to a place where the food was chinam, where it came for free.
Right. So, in a sense, what we have in the Seder is both the disease and the remedy. The disease or danger of being too full and forgetting about God, and the remedy, which the Torah repeatedly tell us, is to remember the Exodus from Egypt.
Yes, I totally agree. That's great. I mean, in the structure of the Seder. Immediately after we eat the afikoman, the last piece of matzah, when we are eating a la sova, when we're eating sated and full, and as you say, it's the disease is the possibility. There's the kind of moral hazard at that moment that we'll forget, and maybe it's also the moral hazard of our day and age, which is that as full sated people, the danger that we have is one of forgetting. At that moment in the Seder, then we move to Hallel, to Birkat Hamazon and to Hallel. So the structure of the Seder is you fill up, you reach that point of satiation, and then the text of the Haggadah itself says, now is the time to levarech, now is the time to say thank you, and now is the time to lehalel, to praise. So assuming that you haven't eaten and drunk so much that you can't finish the Seder, which is a moral hazard, there's a hazard there, as you said. The hazard is that you'll be stuffed and full and forgetful and doze off as you would at maybe at Purim. If you finish the Seder, then the instant you hit the place of satiation, then the Haggadah will call upon you to do an act of remembering as opposed to an act of forgetting. Maybe that's the dichotomy that's contained within the book of Deuteronomy, which is that we have a choice. V'achalta v'savata, we have eaten and been satisfied. Uverachta et Adonai Elohecha, and you should bless God. Or the other alternative, v'achalta v'savata, you should eat and be satisfied. V'shachachta et Adonai Elohecha, and you forget. So what does remembering entail? Like, what does it mean to be full and to remember? And that's a question that we ask. That's, I think, the question that we ask ourselves as pretty middle class, sated, well-fed people. What is it that we have to remember from within our satiation? What is it we have to try and remember from within our satiation? And there are different positions on that. There are voices that say what the Jewish people need to remember is our particularity, and we need to remember to thank God for all the wonders and miracles that God has done for us, and be prepared to put ourselves on the line for that story. And there's other people who say the thing we have to remember is the hunger, that our ear needs to be attuned to the suffering of others, and to the fact that we may be full but other people are hungry. And there are different voices in the Jewish community calling on us to remember different things. But I think everyone who thinks about it thinks that the position that we find ourselves in now, of being sated, is one that has the potential for forgetting, and therefore the voice that calls upon us to remember.
Rabbi, I wish you Shabbat Shalom and Chag Sameach, and thank you for being with us.
Shabbat Shalom, Chag Sameach, Toda Rabba.